The sound of the white piano in the silent night left Adrian Valenti frozen in the dark hallway. For 3 years since his wife, the gifted pianist Serena, passed away, the feared Chicago Mafia boss had forbidden anyone from touching that instrument, not even to wipe the dust. But that night, when he pushed open the door of the forbidden music room, he found the 3-year-old daughter of his housekeeper, Maya Bennett, seated on the piano bench, her small feet dangling above the floor, her tiny fingers clumsily playing every note of a melody only he and Serena had ever known. The entire Valenti estate held its breath, waiting for the ruthless boss to explode in rage. But Adrian did not get angry. What he did next left everyone speechless. Adrian Valenti had turned 39 that spring, though no one in Chicago dared send a card. In the southern ports of the city, where cargo containers moved like slow black beasts through the fog before dawn, his name meant 3 things: order, silence, and consequence. He controlled the shipping routes that stretched from Calumet Harbor to the state line. He owned 4 casinos on the Indiana border. His underground lending desks quietly funded half the construction of the West District. And no one asked who signed the papers because the papers were never signed at all. Every morning at 6, Adrian dressed in the same black suit, black shirt beneath, no tie, a silver watch that had belonged to his grandfather. He drank 1 cup of black coffee in his study, read 3 newspapers in silence, and left for the downtown office at 7. Lawyers waited at the long table. Partners waited longer. When he entered any room, the men rose. The women lowered their eyes. Every employee, from the driver at the gate to the eldest bookkeeper on the 14th floor, called him only one word: Sir. He never ate dinner with anyone. He never received guests at the estate. He did not attend weddings, funerals, or holiday galas. Chicago whispered many things about the mafia boss of the Valenti family, but no one whispered that they had ever heard him laugh. The Valenti estate rose 3 stories above a hill on the northern edge of Lincoln Park. Heavy oak doors, cold marble floors that returned every footstep like a courtroom, chandeliers that had not been lit in years, long corridors lined with paintings whose subjects had all been dead a century. The house was silent the way a museum was silent, arranged, preserved, untouched. Only one person walked those corridors without lowering her voice. Mrs. Rose was 60 years old. She had served 3 generations of the Valenti family. She had scolded Adrian when he was 7 for tracking mud into the drawing room, and she still spoke to him in the same tone at 39. Sir, you did not eat again. I am not hungry, Rose. You are never hungry. And yet you grow thinner. One day I shall bury you before I retire. He did not answer. He never answered her worry, but he never dismissed it either. 3 rules had governed the estate for as long as the newer staff could remember. No one was to speak the name of the mistress of the house. No one was to enter the east wing of the 2nd floor. And no one, not a maid, not a butler, not even Mrs. Rose, was to touch any object that had belonged to her. The key to the music room lay in the top drawer of Adrian's study desk. He did not carry it. He did not look at it. He simply knew where it was, and that was enough. That night, at 11, Adrian stood by the window of his study. Below him, the city burned in yellow and red. In his right hand rested a glass of untouched whiskey. For 3 years he had poured it. For 3 years he had not tasted a drop. Maya Bennett was 28 years old the morning she walked through the iron gates of the Valenti estate. She had not slept well in 14 months. 14 months since a scaffold on the west side of Chicago had collapsed and taken her husband from her before breakfast. 14 months of hospital bills that arrived faster than paychecks. 14 months of borrowing sugar from neighbors and pretending it was fine. She had been serving coffee at a diner on Sheridan Road when Mrs. Rose walked in. The old woman had known Maya's mother 30 years ago in a church choir in Bronzeville. She sat at the counter and ordered black tea and watched. She watched how Maya wiped a spilled cup of coffee off the counter without complaint, folding the rag 3 times so the stain would not spread. She watched how, in the middle of the lunch rush, Maya knelt on the sticky floor to retie the shoelace of a small girl clinging to her apron. The child did not fuss. The mother did not sigh. She only smiled, kissed the tiny palm, and stood up as if nothing in the world had asked more of her than that moment. Mrs. Rose set down her tea. Child, how old is your daughter? 3, ma'am. And how many hours a day do you work? Whatever they will give me. The interview was short. 2 housekeepers had already resigned that year from the Valenti estate. The silence, they said, wore them thin. The master, they said, wore them thinner. Mrs. Rose was tired of training frightened women who left within a season. I will offer you the position. You and the child. You will live in the west wing of the 3rd floor. The rooms are small, but they are warm. You will have 3 rules. Maya listened. Do not speak the name of the late mistress. Do not enter the east wing of the 2nd floor. Do not touch anything that had belonged to her. And, child, do not take it to heart if he does not answer you. He has forgotten how. Maya nodded. She did not ask about salary. She did not ask about days off. She only asked whether Ellie could stay in the room with her at night, and Mrs. Rose said yes. Of course. What kind of woman would she be otherwise? They came 2 days later. 2 old suitcases, a cardboard box tied with kitchen string. Ellie held her stuffed cloth rabbit under one arm, the ears mended twice, the fur worn thin at the belly. It was the last thing her father had bought her before the scaffold fell. It smelled of him, faintly, though only Ellie could still find that smell. The iron gate opened without a sound. The gravel drive stretched longer than any street Ellie had ever walked. The heavy oak doors of the estate swallowed them into a hall of cold marble and painted strangers. Ellie tugged her mother's sleeve. Her voice was very small. "Mama, is there a ghost in this house?" Maya shook her head. She smiled the way mothers smile when they are lying gently, but she felt it too, the temperature that was not quite a temperature, the hush that pressed against the ears. 3 days after Maya began her work at the estate, on a Thursday evening, when the laundry room hummed with the sound of the industrial dryer and the smell of steam clung to Maya's hair, Ellie slipped away. The child was quiet about it. She did not run. She did not call. She only set down her rabbit on the folded pile of towels, wandered into the corridor, and followed the smell of something warm bread, perhaps, or roasted meat down the long carpeted stairs to the first floor. She pushed open a door that was taller than 3 of her. The dining room stretched before her like a hall in a picture book. A single long table of dark walnut, 12 chairs, 12 empty settings of polished silver, and at the far end of that table, beneath the small yellow circle of a single candle, sat one man in a black suit, cutting into a piece of fish he was not eating. Ellie did not hesitate. She walked the whole length of the room, small feet whispering on the marble, and she stopped at his elbow and tugged the sleeve of his jacket. "Uncle, are you sad?" Adrian lifted his head. For 3 years no one had asked him that. Not the lawyers, not the partners, not the old priest who came each Christmas and left without staying. Not even Mrs. Rose, who worried in her own quiet way, but had learned never to name a wound. The 2 waiters at the sideboard went white. One of them dropped a spoon. The other turned and ran silently toward the west corridor, hunting for Maya. Adrian did not answer the child. He simply looked at her, and the small round face looked back at him without a trace of fear. Ellie took his silence as an invitation. She climbed onto the tall chair beside him, one bare knee sliding on the leather, and settled herself with the seriousness of a small judge. Then she reached into her pocket. No, she had left the rabbit upstairs. She frowned, considered, and instead pushed her own hand across the tablecloth toward his. "I will bring him tomorrow. Rabbit, when you are sad, you hug him. Then it is finished." Maya arrived at a run. She stopped at the doorway. She saw her 3-year-old daughter sitting beside Adrian Valenti and pressing a small palm against the back of his hand, and for a moment Maya could not move her feet. Then she moved them. She crossed the room and dropped to her knees on the marble and began to apologize in a shaking voice, pulling Ellie down from the chair. Adrian said nothing to her. He only raised one finger, a small, quiet gesture toward the head butler at the door. He was not angry. Maya carried Ellie away. The child looked back over her mother's shoulder and waved solemnly with her whole hand. That night, Adrian sat with the little rabbit that Maya had brought down the next morning by mistake, tucked under a napkin on the sideboard. He held it in his palm on the empty table. It smelled of cookies and of some kind of sunlight he had forgotten still existed in the world. In the morning, he set the rabbit in the hallway with a small box of candy beside it. No note. Upstairs, Ellie hugged the rabbit back to sleep, entirely unaware that she had just done something no one else in Chicago had dared to do in 3 long years. A few weeks passed, and something in the Valenti estate began to shift the way a locked door shifts in its frame when the weather changes. Ellie should have been afraid of Adrian. Every other child in Chicago would have been. Even grown men bowed their heads and lowered their voices when he crossed a room, but Ellie was 3, and 3 does not know what a mafia boss is. 3 only knows who looks sad, and who does not. She began her small invasions gently, the way a bird begins with the corner of a window before it decides to nest. A cookie tucked beneath the pillow of his bed one Tuesday, half wrapped in a napkin embroidered with strawberries. A wildflower, the yellow kind that grew in the cracks of the garden wall, laid in the exact center of the leather blotter on his desk. A small drawing of what might have been a whale, or possibly a shoe, pressed under the corner of his telephone. And every morning, no matter what floor he crossed, she would appear from around a doorway, plant her small feet, and announce with great seriousness, "Hello, Uncle." He never spoke back. He only nodded. But he nodded. Mrs. Rose watched all of this with wet eyes she did not wipe. 25 years, she said to the head cook one evening. Chopping onions she did not need. 25 years I have served this family. And I have seen a maid dismissed for leaving a teaspoon in the wrong drawer of his study. And now a child leaves a dying dandelion on his papers and he keeps it in his pocket. I have seen the pocket, Marta. He put it in his pocket. Maya was terrified. Every time she caught Ellie sneaking down the corridor with sticky hands and a purposeful expression, she would kneel and hold the child's small shoulders and whisper, "Baby, please, please do not bother the master. Mama needs this job." Ellie would nod, wide-eyed and solemn. And then, within an hour, she would be gone again. The truth Maya did not yet understand was that Adrian had begun to listen for those small footsteps. In the middle of a call with lawyers, he would fall silent for a half-second, tilt his head, and only afterward realize what he had been waiting to hear. One afternoon in the second week, Ellie stood before a heavy oak door on the second floor. The door had a lock the color of old brass, larger than her hand. She pressed her palm flat against it, curious, and then looked up at Mrs. Rose, who had come around the corner too late to stop her. "What is inside, Grandma Rose?" "Nothing that concerns little girls, child. That door is not to be opened. Not by anyone." Ellie did not ask a second time. She only nodded, and slid her hand slowly down from the lock, and walked away holding her rabbit tighter than before. But after that day, every time she passed the corridor, she stopped. She pressed one small ear to the wood and listened, as if the door itself might be breathing. Adrian saw her do it, once. He had stepped from his study and there she was, her cheek flat against the grain, her eyes closed. He did not speak. He only stood and watched, and something behind his eyes moved for the first time in a long while. The storm came down over Chicago on a Friday evening in late October, the kind of storm that turned the streets into slow black rivers and pulled the traffic lights sideways on their wires. Adrian Valenti was in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a downtown tower when the meeting fell apart. 3 of his lawyers sat around the long glass table. Papers spread between them the Newport contract, a proposed lease on 2 warehouses south of the Skyway, the tax structure of a shell company registered in Delaware. The partners from the other side were supposed to arrive at 7. At 7:15 a call came through. Lakeshore Drive was closed. The tunnel under Wacker was flooded to the axles. They would have to reschedule. Adrian did not react. He closed the folder in front of him, buttoned his suit jacket, and gave the lawyers a single nod. "Send them my regards. Reschedule for Monday morning." He was in the back of the black sedan by 8, 2 hours earlier than planned. The rain came down against the windshield in sheets. Rocco drove. He drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, saying nothing, because Rocco knew that Adrian did not enjoy conversation on nights like this, or, perhaps more truthfully, on any night at all. The wipers beat back and forth. Water crawled sideways along the glass beside Adrian's cheek in long trembling lines that broke and reformed and broke again. Adrian watched them without really watching. His mind moved on rails he had laid down a decade ago. The financial report on his desk that needed initialing before dawn. The call with the Marchetti family in the morning. Whether to send flowers or a warning to the councilman on Halstead who had begun asking the wrong questions. He was not thinking of anything unusual. He had no premonition. The night was meant to be ordinary. A wet drive, a dry study, a quiet page. The sedan reached the estate at 10:47. The iron gate rolled open. Gravel hissed beneath the tires. Rocco stopped beneath the covered entrance, stepped out with an umbrella, and Adrian passed under it without slowing. The main hall was dim. One low lamp burned on the console beside the coat stand. The night porter, an older man named Vincenzo, who had worked the graveyard shift for 11 years, stepped forward silently and took the wet overcoat from Adrian's shoulders. Adrian gave him the same small nod he gave everyone. Vincenzo bowed his head half an inch and stepped back into the shadow. The hall was quiet the way it was always quiet. Adrian turned toward the grand staircase. He intended to climb to the 3rd floor, to the study, to sit with the port contract, until his eyes burned, and his back ached, and the numbers finally aligned. He set his hand on the polished banister. He set his foot on the first step. And then he heard it. A piano, clear, slow, hesitant, but exact, each note found with the care of someone who did not know how to arrive at it any faster. Rising from somewhere on the 2nd floor, Adrian went still. For 3 years that door had been locked. No one else had a key. Mrs. Rose would not dare. No member of the staff had ever stepped foot into the east wing. His hand tightened on the banister. The vein at his temple began to beat. Anger rose in his chest, hot and immediate. Who had dared? He began to climb. He did not run. He moved 1 step at a time, his whole body drawn tight as wire. The higher he rose, the clearer the melody became, every note landing softly, patient, unafraid. By the time he reached the 2nd floor corridor, he had stopped again, because he recognized it. Adrian did not shout. He did not slam the door. He did not stride across the room and lift the child from the bench. He stepped inside slowly, the way a man walks into cold water when he already knows how deep it is. Each footfall on the parquet felt as though he were wading through 3 years of unbroken silence. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and of the dust that had been dusted around, never through Mrs. Rose's small guilty ritual made visible only now. In the low lamp, Ellie must have somehow turned on herself. He reached the center of the room, and his knees gave. He did not fall. He knelt. Ellie turned her head at the sound of his suit brushing the floor. She saw the tall, serious uncle on the ground behind her, and her small face folded with concern. She slid down from the bench, feet hitting the parquet with a soft double thump, and came running, 2 small palms pressed against his cheeks, warm, sticky faintly of something sweet from earlier that evening. "Uncle, do not cry. Did I play it wrong?" Adrian could not answer. His mouth opened once and closed. He reached forward and pulled her against his chest and held her the way a drowning man holds a floating plank with the whole of his body, without dignity, without control. And for the first time in 3 years, sound came out of him. Not a word. A single ragged breath that broke in his throat and became something too old to name. At the doorway, Maya arrived at a run. She stopped so suddenly that her hand caught the frame. She saw her daughter in the arms of the master of the house, saw his shoulders shaking, and she could not draw a breath. She opened her mouth to call Ellie back. Mrs. Rose reached the doorway, a heartbeat behind her. The older woman set a firm hand on Maya's shoulder and shook her head once. "Do not. Not now." Adrian held Ellie a long time. The old carriage clock on the mantel ticked twice, then twice again, and neither Maya nor Mrs. Rose moved from the doorway. When he finally released the child, she blinked up at him with the same wide, uncomprehending eyes, still trying to work out what she had done to make so large a man so small. Adrian's voice came low, hoarse, careful. "Where did you learn that melody, child?" Ellie shrugged with the whole seriousness of 3 years old. "I do not know. My fingers just ran." He looked at her. He looked at the piano, the ivory keys still slightly warm from her touch. He looked at the small, silver-framed photograph resting on the closed lid above the music rack. The woman in the photograph was smiling. It seemed, in the low light, that she was smiling at him. He did not understand what had just happened. He only understood that the wound he had bandaged for 3 years had split open again, and not in any of the ways he had prepared himself to survive. He lifted Ellie down and carried her to the door. Maya reached for her, stammering apologies she had rehearsed 1,000 times but never expected to use. Adrian looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. There is nothing to apologize for. She did nothing wrong. He turned and walked past them both, and he did not close the door of the music room behind him. No one in the estate slept that night. Hours later, in the darkness of his study, Adrian sat with his hand resting on the small brass key inside the top drawer of his desk. He did not lift it. He did not need to. The key had ceased to mean anything the moment a 3-year-old had opened the door without it. The morning after the storm, Adrian sent word for Maya to come to his study. She had barely slept. She had spent the long hours before dawn folding Ellie's small clothes into the 2 old suitcases they had arrived with. She was certain she was being dismissed. Any other master in Chicago would have thrown them into the rain by breakfast. She stood in front of his desk with her hands crossed at the waist, the way her mother had taught her to stand when facing bad news. Adrian did not begin with the night before. He asked her, quietly, how long Ellie had been able to remember a melody after hearing it once. Maya blinked. She had not expected the question. She answered honestly. She did not know. They had never owned a piano, never a violin, never anything. There was only an old kitchen radio in her aunt's apartment that hummed church hymns on Sunday mornings, while Ellie stirred sugar into her cereal. Adrian was silent a long time. Then he pulled open the top drawer of the desk. He lifted the small brass key that had lived there for 3 years. He set it down on the polished wood between them. From today, Ellie may enter the music room whenever she wishes. So may you. Maya's mouth opened. Her voice, when it came, was uncertain. "Sir, why?" Adrian did not explain. He only said, "The piano needs to be heard again." She left the study with the key wrapped in a handkerchief in her apron pocket, because she was afraid to hold it in her open palm. Within the week, Adrian called a tuner. The old man drove up from the west side, opened his leather case in the middle of the music room, and pressed one key. He listened. He pressed another. He looked up at Adrian with faint astonishment. "Sir, this piano has been played on almost no dust. Someone has been caring for it." Adrian said nothing. Mrs. Rose, standing in the doorway pretending to arrange fresh lilies in a vase, examined the ceiling with sudden interest. The tuner worked for 3 hours. The strings had drifted, some sharp, some flat, and he coaxed them back into agreement one by one. Ellie began to come and go from the music room as she pleased. She never played anything long. She would climb onto the bench, tap 3 or 4 notes with the concentration of a small surgeon, laugh at herself, and then run off to torment Mrs. Rose in the kitchen. She did not know how to play. Sometimes, without warning, her fingers found a small phrase and repeated it twice, as though remembering something she had never learned. Adrian began to sit in the music room in the evenings. He carried financial reports with him, spread them across the small side table, and pretended to read. He turned pages at the correct intervals. In truth, he was only listening for footsteps, for a stray note, for the small breathing of a child who never once asked him why he was there. "Mrs. Rose whispered to Maya in the pantry one morning. "In 25 years, I have never seen him remain in one room longer than his own study. Never. Not even his own bedroom. Something has come loose in him, child. Do not frighten it." One evening, Ellie climbed into his lap without asking. She pointed one small finger at the black key nestled between 2 whites. "What is this one called?" "F sharp. Why is it black?" Adrian smiled. It was a small smile, a tired one, unpracticed as a first step on ice, but it was the first smile in 3 years that had not been given to a contract. The lessons at the piano bench were only the beginning. Within days, Ellie began to interfere with the whole rhythm of Adrian's life, with the calm certainty of a small general who did not yet know she was outranked by anyone. She would appear in his study late at night, barefoot in her yellow pajamas, and tug the sleeve of his suit jacket with both hands. She tugged hard enough one Tuesday that his fountain pen jumped and drew a long black scar across a 50-page contract from the Harbor Authority. He did not scold her. He capped the pen. He folded the paper. He followed her out. She dragged him to lunch in the servants' kitchen. In 15 years of owning the estate, Adrian had never once sat at that long pine table beneath the copper pans. On the first day, Mrs. Rose and the 4 kitchen staff nearly forgot how to hold their forks. A young kitchen assistant named Nina crossed herself under the table. Ellie sat squarely between Adrian and Nina, kicking her feet in the air because they did not touch the floor, and inspected his plate. "Uncle, why are you not eating the vegetables?" Adrian looked at the green beans. He ate the green beans. Mrs. Rose retold that story to Maya that night with her apron pressed to her eyes. Ellie fell asleep on the sofa beside him one evening as he read a quarterly report. She had climbed up, promising she would only listen, and within 10 minutes her small mouth had fallen open and one hand had gone limp on his knee. Adrian did not move. Not for the first hour, not for the second. His left leg went to sleep beneath her weight. He did not shift. He turned each page slowly with one hand. Another night she demanded a bedtime story. He opened his laptop and prepared, with perfect seriousness, to read her a briefing on cargo tariffs in a solemn voice. She stopped him within 3 words. She wanted the wolf. He had to be the wolf. Adrian, who had negotiated with 3 families and outlasted 2 federal investigations, surrendered to a 3-year-old and produced a small, tentative growl. Ellie fell backward on the cushions, laughing. Then she informed him with great authority that his wolf sounded like a cat with a cold. He laughed. He did not intend to. He did not manage it. It came out of him the way rain comes out of a cloud that has held on too long unbidden, unpolished, and honest. He could not remember the last time he had laughed at something that was not a bitter joke about a rival. Mrs. Rose, passing the doorway, kept walking without turning her head, but the corner of her mouth moved. Later, in the kitchen, she said to Maya, "The master of this house is being domesticated by a 3-year-old. I must write it in my journal so my grandchildren will believe me one day." Maya smiled and looked at her hands. She kept a careful distance. She was the housekeeper. He was the head of the Valenti family. She would not allow herself even the shape of a dream, but she noticed. She noticed that he began to say thank you when she brought him tea. She noticed that he began to greet the staff by their names in the corridors, where before he had only nodded. One evening past midnight, Ellie ran a small fever and a dry cough. Maya sat up, rocking her. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Adrian in the hallway, still in shirt sleeves, holding a small box of children's medicine and a tin of warm ginger tea. "Mrs. Rose said you might need these." He did not step inside. He did not ask after the child. He set them in her hands, nodded once, and walked away down the corridor. Maya closed the door slowly. She stood a moment holding the small box and the warm tin. Her hands trembled slightly, and it was not from the draft in the corridor. Later that same night, Adrian stood on the balcony of the 3rd floor and looked down over the dark garden. The sky was clear. The city glowed low and orange in the distance, and for the first time in 3 years, the weight in the center of his chest did not sit heavy enough to make breathing hard. After that night on the balcony, Adrian began to see Maya, not the way a master sees a housekeeper, but the way one human being sees another when the fog lifts. He noticed small things he had no business noticing. He noticed that the light under her door still burned at 1 a.m, and that when Mrs. Rose complained the next day about a needle missing from the sewing basket, Maya returned it with a small guilty smile. And Ellie appeared at breakfast in a winter coat that had not existed the week before, its cuffs let out by 2 careful inches of matching fabric that could only have come from an old skirt of her mother's. He noticed that Maya ate whatever the kitchen was about to throw away: the crusts of the pies, the ends of the roasts, the bruised half of the fruit. She did it quickly and without fuss, as though it were a chore. He noticed that when Ellie asked for a second cup of warm milk before bed, Maya would say she was not hungry, and would pour the second cup from her own, and would smile and rub her stomach as though she had already eaten too much. One evening, close to 11, Adrian went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. He did not expect to find anyone there. Maya sat at the small pine table beneath the copper pans. She was not sobbing. She was not wiping her face. She simply sat with her hands around a cup of cold tea while tears fell one after another, evenly, into the surface. He did not ask. He did not stop. He went to the stove, poured hot water into a clean cup, dropped in a fresh tea bag, set it beside her elbow, and left the kitchen without speaking. The next morning he told Mrs. Rose to double Maya's salary. He offered no reason. Mrs. Rose informed Maya in the pantry that same afternoon, and by evening Maya was standing in front of Adrian's desk with the envelope held out in both hands. "Sir, I cannot accept this. I do not earn this." Adrian looked at her a long moment. "This is not a gift. This is fairness. You do the work of 2 because Ellie lives here as well. You eat half of what the others eat. I am simply adjusting the number to match what is already true." Maya was silent. Her jaw moved once, as though she wanted to argue, and could not find the words that would not sound proud. She lowered her hands. She accepted the envelope. From that day, they began to speak. Not much, never in the way friends spoke, but as equals, in short sentences that met each other in the middle of a sentence and did not need to explain themselves. He asked her, one evening, about her husband. She told him briefly. A scaffold on the west side, no settlement, 3 jobs to pay the hospital bills that came for months after the funeral. She said it without asking for pity. Adrian did not interrupt her. He did not offer money. He understood that offering money would lower her, and he did not wish to lower her. He only said, "You are stronger than most of the men I do business with." Maya's cheeks warmed. She looked down at her hands. "I am not strong, sir. I only had no other choice." He shook his head. "There were other choices. You could have handed her to the state. You could have married a man for his wallet. You did neither. That is strength." Maya looked at him differently after that night. Mrs. Rose noticed first, and said nothing, and only smiled to herself when she thought no one saw. Later that week, past midnight, Adrian crossed the 3rd-floor corridor on his way from the study. He stopped, without thinking, in front of Maya's closed door. He did not knock. He stood a few seconds. Then he walked on. He was beginning to wait for accidental meetings in these corridors. He understood, at last, what that meant. Noticing a thing was one matter. Allowing himself to feel it was quite another. A soft gray rain fell over Chicago that afternoon, not a storm. Only the kind of quiet, patient rain that pressed the windows and slowed the whole estate into a hush. Ellie was playing hide-and-seek in the music room with her cloth rabbit. Mrs. Rose and Maya were on the 3rd floor, folding linens and beating the dust out of the tall curtains, and no one thought to check on the child, because Ellie was often quiet when she was happiest. She had hidden the rabbit beneath the piano bench. Now she was crawling under to fetch it back, her small elbows dragging on the parquet, her yellow dress bunching around her waist. Her elbow struck something. A piece of wood on the underside of the bench had shifted the smallest amount. She frowned. She pushed it. It moved further. She pushed it with the seriousness of a small carpenter, and the panel slid sideways and dropped into her palm, revealing a hidden compartment about the size of a shoebox, cut cleanly into the belly of the bench. Ellie caught her breath. Inside the compartment lay 2 things: a thick sheaf of handwritten music paper, tied with a length of red velvet ribbon, and a cream-colored envelope, heavy paper, sealed with wax, addressed in delicate ink handwriting to 3 words she did not yet know how to read. For Adrian from Serena. She did not know the letters, but she knew the shape of grown-up things. She scrambled out from under the bench with both items clutched to her chest and the rabbit forgotten on the floor. She found her mother in the 3rd-floor linen closet, folding warm towels in tall, neat stacks. "Mama, I found this under the piano chair. Did Uncle Adrian hide my toys down there?" Maya turned. She saw the envelope. She saw the name written in the ink of a hand that no longer existed in the world. The color left her face. She recognized the fine, feminine script. She had seen the same handwriting on a birthday card taped inside a cookbook Mrs. Rose kept locked in her private cupboard, and once on the flyleaf of a book of poetry Adrian kept on the shelf behind his desk. It was Serena's hand. Maya understood at once that this might be something left behind for the master by his late wife, something no one had ever known about, something she had no right to open, no right to hide, and no right to carry loosely in a corridor. Adrian was downstairs in a live conference call with the Marchetti family. Interrupting him was unthinkable. Maya knelt to Ellie's height and spoke gently. "Baby, this is Uncle Adrian's secret. We will give it to him ourselves. Do not say anything to anyone else. Not to Grandma Rose, not to any of the kitchen staff, not even to Rabbit. Yes?" Ellie nodded with tremendous seriousness, pressed one finger to her lips as though she had learned it from a cartoon, and whispered, "Shh." Maya carried the envelope and the ribbon sheaf into her own small room, tucked them into the drawer of her writing table, and locked the drawer with the small key she wore on the string around her neck. She would give both to Adrian tonight. When his call was over, she gathered the folded towels into her arms and stepped back into the third-floor corridor. At exactly that moment, Victor Hale crossed the hallway. He was Adrian's right hand of 12 years, the head of estate security. He nodded to her, polite as always, the small bland smile he reserved for staff. His eyes flicked once, casually, over what she held. She had carried the envelope down with her. She was going to slip it into her apron pocket for the evening, and it lay uppermost on the folded towels. Victor's eyes touched the ink handwriting. He recognized it instantly. He had seen that hand 3 years ago, on ledger margins, on small notes clipped to auditing files, on a single question mark drawn beside a transaction he had never expected any woman to notice. The blood left his face for less than half a second. Then he restored the polite smile. He nodded once more. He walked on. Maya noticed nothing. Victor reached his own room at the far end of the corridor, closed the door behind him, and leaned back against the wood. He gripped the doorknob so hard the knuckles of his hand went white. For 3 years he had believed the secret had died with Serena. It had just come back to life in the hands of a housekeeper and a 3-year-old child. Victor Hale was 45 years old, and he had been part of the Valenti household for longer than most of the men who now called him boss in the shipping yards. His father had once driven the black Cadillac of Adrian's grandfather, and Victor had grown up sleeping in the room above the estate garage. When old Vincenzo Valenti died and his son handed the family to Adrian, Adrian had drawn Victor to his side and given him the keys. Not just the ordinary keys, the trusted keys. Victor held the security of the estate. He kept the codes for the night alarm. He held the secondary combination for every safe in the house, including the one behind the mirror in Adrian's own dressing room. When Adrian traveled, Victor slept in the West Wing. When Adrian was in the house, Victor knew the position of every camera and the timing of every shift change, because he had designed them himself. Adrian trusted him absolutely. For the last 5 years, Victor had been stealing from him. It had begun small. A skimmed percentage from an unlicensed lending desk in Cicero, a quiet redirection of one shipment's cash payment through a shell company registered in Delaware, then a second shell, then a third, then contracts on cargo timing that he passed, in a plain envelope, to a man from the Kozlov family, the Russian outfit, trying patiently and expensively to force a foothold into the southern ports Adrian controlled. $12 million had passed through Victor's private accounts over 5 years, perhaps more. He had stopped counting. 3 years ago, Serena had begun to help Adrian audit the family's charitable foundation. It was a small favor. She had wanted only to lift some paperwork off her husband's shoulders during a heavy season. She had been trained as a musician, but she had a musician's ear for patterns, and the ledgers were full of patterns that should not have been there. She had said nothing at first. She had begun to compare, quietly, one column against another. She had begun to keep her own separate notebook. Once, on a spring evening, he had never expected her to leave the estate. She had followed Victor's sedan west across the city to an abandoned warehouse on the far bank of the river, and she had watched him meet a man she did not recognize. She had intended to bring the evidence to Adrian when it was complete. She did not want to accuse without proof. Then the cough had started, then the weight loss, then the doctor's face at the third appointment, 3 months in the hospital, and then the room without her in it. Victor had grieved with a face that ached from grieving, and in his heart he had believed, for 3 years, that the secret had gone into the ground with her. Now he stood in his own room at the far end of the third-floor corridor with the door closed and his back against the wood, and he understood that he had been wrong. He had seen the envelope in the housekeeper's hands. He had seen the ink of a hand that no longer wrote. If that letter reached Adrian, everything ended. Not only the money, not only the position, Adrian would kill him with his own 2 hands. Victor had watched Adrian do worse to men who had betrayed less. and the Kozlovs would kill him first, to seal his mouth. Before Adrian ever got the chance, he sat down at his desk and began to think. He could not attack Maya directly. Adrian's feeling for her was clear to anyone with eyes, whether or not the fool himself had admitted it yet. Any hand raised to her would be traced and traced fast. He could not steal the envelope back. There were cameras in the third-floor corridor. He himself had installed them. There was only one path. He had to break Adrian's trust in Maya before the letter reached his hand. If Adrian dismissed her tonight, tomorrow morning, at any hour before she spoke, she would leave, and the envelope would leave with her, out of the reach of cameras and locks, and then Victor could take it back on ground of his own choosing. He needed a weapon that would strike at the exact place Adrian was still bleeding. He thought of it slowly, and then all at once. The diamond necklace. Adrian had given it to Serena on their wedding day. It sat in the private safe in the master's dressing room, in a black velvet box that had not been opened in 3 years. $200,000 in stones. And beyond any price in memory, Victor had the secondary code. For emergencies, this qualified. He sat at that desk until the gray of morning came up over the garden. He did not turn on a lamp. He wrote nothing down. He built the plan piece by piece inside his own skull, where no camera could see it. At dawn he rose, washed his face, put on a fresh gray suit, and began. Victor waited for the perfect morning. It came on a Tuesday. Adrian left the estate at 8, dressed for a downtown meeting with 3 of the family lawyers on a lease renewal that would run past noon. He had told Mrs. Rose he would not be home for lunch. Maya took Ellie out into the rose garden with Mrs. Rose to help cut stems for the dining room. Victor watched them from the corridor window until all 3 had disappeared behind the trellis. Then he moved. He pulled a pair of thin leather gloves from the inside pocket of his gray suit as he crossed the second-floor landing. He entered Adrian's bedroom without hurry, closed the door from the inside, and turned the small brass latch that only a member of the security detail was allowed to touch. The safe sat in the dressing room, behind a full-length mirror on a hidden hinge. He swung the mirror aside, laid his fingers on the keypad, and entered the secondary code. The steel door released with a soft, expensive breath. Inside lay bound stacks of currency, 3 folders of contracts, 2 passports, and, on the second shelf, a small black velvet box. He lifted it out. He did not open it. He did not need to. He knew what was inside. He closed the safe, wiped the keypad with the corner of his sleeve, swung the mirror back into place, and stepped out into the corridor. He climbed to the 3rd floor. Maya was still in the shared bathroom at the far end of the corridor, giving Ellie her midday bath. That bath ran between 45 and 60 minutes every day. He had timed it 3 afternoons in a row. He had 8 minutes. He entered her small room. He crossed to the wicker laundry basket in the corner. Ellie's soiled clothes lay in a bright pile on top, a stained yellow bib, a sock, a pair of small trousers with grass at the knees. He lifted the whole tangle carefully, slid the velvet box down to the very bottom of the basket beneath the last layer of Maya's own dark shirts, and lowered the child's clothes back over it, as though nothing had ever been disturbed. He left the room, closed the door softly, and walked the corridor along the exact line he had once marked with tape for the security camera's blind spot. The camera would show no one entering, no one leaving. The trap was set. Now he needed the discovery. Adrian returned to the estate at 4:50. He was pulling off his overcoat in the front hall when Victor met him with the small, worried expression he had rehearsed twice in the mirror. "Sir, the secondary safe registered an irregular access signature at midday. I recommend we check it immediately." Adrian went upstairs without changing his shirt. The safe opened. Adrian saw at once what was missing: the black velvet box. He did not react outwardly. He only stood a moment with his hand on the frame of the mirror. Victor spoke gently, the way one speaks to a man holding a fragile thing. "Sir, it is an item of great value. Standard security protocol requires that we search all private spaces within the estate, including staff quarters. I know this is uncomfortable. It is the procedure." Adrian was silent. Then he said only, discreetly, "No one is to be shamed." Victor bowed his head. "Of course, sir." He arranged the sequence himself. 4 kitchen staff rooms first. Nothing. Mrs. Rose's own room second. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded, watching Victor lift her linens with a face like winter. Nothing. Maya's room last. Adrian walked with them. He did not want Maya to be treated without dignity. He intended to stand in the doorway himself and say a few words to her before Victor began to explain, to make clear that this was routine, that he was certain of nothing. Maya opened the door in her apron with a folded towel in one hand. She looked from Victor to Adrian and back, and her face went still with the small confusion of the innocent. Ellie was asleep on the narrow child's bed against the far wall, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Victor stepped inside politely. "Ma'am, a brief inspection. Standard." He walked directly to the wicker laundry basket in the corner. Adrian opened his mouth to say, "That will not be necessary." Victor had already knelt. He lifted Ellie's small clothes aside. He reached to the bottom. His gloved hand closed around something small and hard. He drew it out. A black velvet box. He turned it in his palm and opened the lid with a delicate flick of his thumb. The diamond necklace lay inside on its bed of cream silk, catching the low afternoon light and throwing it back in small cold fires across the ceiling. Adrian went still. Maya went still. Ellie stirred at the small metallic sound of the box opening and sat up in bed, her hair tousled, her rabbit pressed to her cheek, her wide eyes moving from her mother to Adrian, to the shining thing in Victor's hand. Adrian took the box from Victor without a word. He held it in his palm, his eyes lifted slowly from the necklace to Maya. Maya was shaking her head. Her lips had parted, but no sound was coming out. Adrian stood with the velvet box open in his palm. He wanted to believe Maya. Every reasonable thing he had learned about her in these last months told him that she could not do this. Not a woman who let her own dinner grow cold to fill her daughter's cup. Not a woman who mended a winter coat by candlelight rather than take $1 she had not earned. But 3 years of solitude rose behind his ribs like a slow tide. 3 years of a wound that had taught him to trust no one who came smiling. And older than that, the memory of his own father, stabbed in the back at his own dining table by his own younger brother in a quarrel over the family holdings. That memory had shaped every hire, every contract, every closed door in Adrian's life. It rose now, without permission, and beneath all of it, the ugly, small voice. "How long have you truly known her?" He was silent. 3 seconds. Only 3 seconds. But Maya saw them. Not accusation. Not even suspicion. Quite. Only hesitation. Only the flicker of a perhaps. And that flicker hurt her worse than a shouted charge would have hurt, because a shout could have been answered. A hesitation from the man she had begun, in some quiet corner of herself, to trust that could not. She did not weep. She did not plead. She did not offer an explanation. She stood straight. Her voice came low and clear. "I did not take it, but if you look at me with those eyes for 1 second longer, sir, I will not be able to stay either." Adrian's mouth opened to answer. Victor was faster. He stepped forward with the gentle gravity of a man discharging an unpleasant duty. "Sir, this is a serious matter. We ought to open a formal investigation. It may be necessary to involve our internal counsel, perhaps the police." Maya cut across him. Her voice did not rise. "There is no need to investigate. I resign. I will pack, in the morning." Mrs. Rose had come running from the corridor at the raised voices. She stopped in the doorway with a hand pressed to her chest. She looked at Maya, at Adrian, at the necklace, at Victor. Then she stepped past Victor entirely and took Adrian by the sleeve. "Sir, listen to me. In my whole life I have never spoken to you this way. But I am telling you this woman did not do this. I would swear it on my mother's grave. I am swearing it." Adrian did not answer her either. He was still trying to swallow down 3 years of practiced doubt, and the swallowing was slow. That slowness, those extra silent seconds while he tried to be the man he already wanted to be, cost him everything. Maya looked at him one last time. She turned. She walked to the small bed. She lifted Ellie into her arms. Ellie did not understand. She only clutched her cloth rabbit and looked over her mother's shoulder at Adrian, her small face uncertain and open. "Uncle Adrian, what did Mama do wrong?" Adrian could not answer. The question of a 3-year-old squeezed his heart in his chest until he felt the shape of it. He wanted to say no, no one, nothing, come here, come back, but the words would not rise. They stayed behind his teeth like stones. Maya carried her daughter past him. She did not slam the door. She closed it, softly, the way a woman closes a door on something she is not coming back through. That night Adrian did not sleep. He sat in the study with the velvet box open on the desk. The diamonds threw their small, cold fires up onto the ceiling and moved with the flicker of the lamp. He looked at them for a long time. Something was wrong. If Maya had truly stolen, why had she hidden it so poorly? A woman who could mend a coat by candlelight without waking a child knew how to hide a small, hard object. Why the very afternoon Victor had recommended a search? Why had Victor gone directly to the laundry basket in Maya's room, when in every other room he had opened the drawers first? Adrian had watched him do it. He had not noticed at the time. He was noticing now. The suspicion had begun, small and cold, like the first crack in ice. But the sky was already turning gray at the windows. Morning came before he had finished thinking. He stood at the study window and looked down into the front court. Maya was fastening the last strap on the second old suitcase. Ellie sat on the stone step with the cloth rabbit pressed against her chest, waiting. Adrian wanted to run down the stairs. His feet would not lift. 3 years of the past sat on his shoulders heavier than he had ever understood. The morning of departure came gray and low, the kind of morning that seemed to have already decided to forget what happened in it. Mrs. Rose stood in the front hall in her apron with her mouth pressed thin. She pushed into Maya's hand a small envelope containing a last month's wages she had drawn from her own private savings, and a paper box tied with kitchen string filled with the almond biscuits Ellie loved. She did not manage to speak. Her chin trembled once, and she pressed her lips harder. The kitchen staff came out one by one and stood in a small, quiet line near the door. Nina, the young assistant, was crying openly. The head cook stared at his own shoes. No one in that hall believed for a moment that Maya had taken anything. But none of them had a voice loud enough in that house to argue against the master of it. The taxi arrived on the gravel drive. The driver climbed out and opened the trunk. Maya carried down the 2 old suitcases herself and set them in. She knelt to Ellie's height beside the passenger door. "Baby, say goodbye to Grandma Rose." Ellie ran to Mrs. Rose. She wrapped both arms around the old woman's waist so tight that Mrs. Rose's spine curved forward. Mrs. Rose put a hand on the little girl's head and did not say a word. Then Ellie let go and ran, not toward the taxi, but back into the house. "Ellie," Maya called after her. Ellie did not turn. She climbed the grand staircase with the seriousness of a small ambassador on an urgent errand. She crossed the 2nd floor. She climbed the 2nd staircase. She reached the closed door of the study on the 3rd floor. She pushed it open. Adrian stood at the tall window with his back to the room, his hand flat against the glass. Ellie walked to his desk. She set 2 things down on the polished wood: a cream envelope, sealed with wax, addressed in a delicate hand, for Adrian, from Serena, and a sheaf of handwritten music paper tied with a length of red velvet ribbon. Maya had locked them in the drawer of her writing table the previous afternoon. She had meant to give them to Adrian last night until the necklace. This morning, packing, she had held them a long time in her hands, uncertain. She had almost decided to leave them for Mrs. Rose to pass along. Ellie had seen her mother holding them. She had asked, "Is that Uncle Adrian's?" And when her mother had turned to close a suitcase, Ellie had quietly taken them. Now she placed them on the desk of the tall, serious uncle. "I found these under the piano chair. Mama said to give them to you. I am giving them to you as a goodbye present. Do not be sad, Uncle. I will remember the song you like." Then she ran out, and she did not turn around. Adrian did not move for a long moment. He looked at the cream envelope. That handwriting. He had not seen that handwriting for 3 years. His hand shook once as he reached for it. Downstairs, the taxi door thudded closed. He heard the small sound. He heard the tires begin to crunch on gravel. He did not call after them. He could not. Yet. He lowered himself into the chair. His fingertips traced the line of the ink across the paper as though it were a face. He broke the wax seal. Inside lay 2 thick sheets, written on both sides in Serena's careful, patient hand. The date at the top was 3 months before her death. He read the first line. "Adrian, my love, if I am still in time, I will say all this to you myself, but I am racing against something now, and there are some things I cannot allow to die with me. The man you trust the most is the one who has been breaking you from the inside." He read slowly. He read it a 2nd time. Serena had written it all down. The irregular transactions she had found while auditing the family foundation, the 3 offshore accounts in Delaware, the 2 secret meetings she had followed to a warehouse on the western edge of the city, the man in the plain sedan whose face she had not been able to identify but whose accent she had recognized as Russian. She had written the estimated total, more than $10 million. She had written that she was gathering the final proof. She had written also, at the end, "Forgive me for being silent while I waited for evidence. I did not want to accuse without certainty. I needed more time. If I do not have it, trust this letter. Trust it as if I were still beside you saying it. Forgive me for not speaking sooner. I love you. I love the whole of your life, including the part you will have to live without me." Adrian set the letter down. His hand was no longer shaking. His hand had gone still. For 3 years he had guarded a locked door as though it were a vow. For 3 years he had punished the entire world for losing her. And for 3 of those years, the man who had actually betrayed her, who had betrayed the whole of the Valenti family, had eaten at his table every week. The woman he had doubted for 3 seconds had just driven away in a taxi with a child on her lap, dismissed for a necklace that had been placed in her laundry basket. Adrian stood. He crossed the room in 4 long strides. He pressed the internal communication button beside the door. His voice, when it came, was cold enough to freeze a river. "Security, pull every second of camera footage from the past 48 hours in the vicinity of Maya Bennett's room. Now, and find Victor Hale. Do not let him know we are looking." The head of security carried a laptop into Adrian's study within 15 minutes. His name was Enzo. He set the machine on the desk and did not speak. He knew when to speak and when to be a wall in the corner. He had been a wall in the corner for 11 years. Adrian sat down. His fingers rested against the edge of the desk. Enzo cued the footage of the third-floor corridor from the previous day. Adrian nodded once. The video began to run at 4 times normal speed. Adrian raised his hand at exactly 12:47 in the afternoon. Enzo dropped the playback to normal. A figure stepped into the frame from the far end of the corridor. Gray suit, thin leather gloves. A short, quick stride, cleanly aware of the camera's angle. He walked directly to Maya's door. He opened it without hesitation, as though he already knew it would be unlocked. He stepped inside. The door closed. 6 minutes later, the door opened again. The same figure stepped out empty-handed. His shoulders had relaxed. His pace was easier than when he had entered. At the corner of the corridor, before he turned, he glanced back once toward the direction of the shared bathroom at the far end. That single glance turned his face into the light. Victor. There was no one else in the footage. No one before him. No one after him. Only Victor Hale, alone in the corridor, at the exact hour Maya and Ellie had been in the bath. Adrian was silent for 5 seconds. Then he stood. Enzo, get me Rocco. And Salvatore. Now. The 2 men arrived within 4 minutes of each other. Rocco, 50 years old, broad through the chest, a scar across his eyebrow he had earned the night he had put himself between Adrian's father and a knife. Salvatore, 62, thin, white-haired, the family lawyer who had drafted every quiet contract in the Valenti Empire and had never once written a word he could not defend in a courtroom he would never be called into. Adrian placed Serena's letter in Salvatore's hand and turned the laptop toward Rocco. Read, watch, then move. They read, they watched. Neither man spoke while they did. When they finished, Adrian said only, I need Victor in this room within 1 hour. He must not suspect. Tell him a port contract has gone sideways and I need him. Rocco nodded once and left. Salvatore did not leave. He sat down opposite Adrian. Together they began to pull every account number Serena had written into the letter. Adrian dictated them from memory the moment his eyes touched them. Salvatore recorded them into a secure device. 3 offshore accounts. 2 shell companies in Delaware. 1 holding entity in the Cayman chain. Salvatore's mouth grew thinner with each entry. 3 years of an unsolved silence unspooled in 45 minutes. Rocco returned empty-handed. Sir, Victor is not on the estate. The gate log shows he left 20 minutes ago with a suitcase and a leather briefcase. He told the gate he was going to a downtown meeting on your behalf. His phone is off. His car has no GPS. He removed the tracker last month and logged it as maintenance. Adrian did not look surprised. Victor had built the escape door long before today. Perhaps from the moment he had seen Maya carrying a cream envelope down the third-floor corridor, Adrian gave orders quickly. Salvatore, freeze the 3 offshore accounts immediately. Every dollar. I want the money paralyzed before he reaches a keyboard. Then get me our internal counsel and the 2 federal contacts we still trust. Build the file tonight. Rocco, close every channel Victor has ever used with the Kozlov family. Every one. If he tries to buy protection, I want the door slammed in his face before his hand touches the knob. Both men left the room. Within 2 hours, Adrian had locked down the entirety of the assets Victor had bled from the family. The traitor would find, at whatever airport or safe house he had chosen, that the money he had prepared his escape on had turned to stone. But Victor was not the most important target this hour. Adrian sat back down. He pressed his fingertips into his temples. He had dismissed Maya because of something Victor had arranged. He did not know where she was. Her phone number was on file. It was written, in the small, neat hand of Mrs. Rose, on the second line of Maya's staff record. He picked up the telephone. He hesitated. She had told him clearly, without any raised voice, that she could not stay if he looked at her that way. What would he say now? I was wrong. Come back. 6 words that would cost her nothing to refuse. He knew Maya was not a woman who forgave quickly, not because she was proud, because life had bruised her too many times for her to trust a hurried apology. He set the receiver back on its cradle. He did not deserve to call yet. First, he had to make the wrong thing right by his hands, not by his mouth. He called Mrs. Rose on the internal line. Rose, do you know where she went? There was a small silence at the other end of the line. Then Mrs. Rose's voice, tired and even. She said she would stay with her cousin for a few days. A woman named Lena, in Melrose Park. I have the address. Would you like me to call her, sir? No, not yet. Only the address. He wrote it on a slip of paper. And, Rose, thank you, for believing her when I did not. Mrs. Rose was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. Sir, she believed you. That is the part that hurts. The line went still. Adrian set down the receiver. He opened the top drawer of his desk. He took out the small brass key of the music room. the key that had lost its meaning the night a 3-year-old had opened that door without it. He closed it inside his palm and shut his hand into a fist. Maya and Ellie arrived at the small greenhouse in Melrose Park that same afternoon. Lena was Maya's cousin, a night shift nurse at a West Side hospital, unmarried. Living alone in 2 narrow bedrooms she had painted herself. She opened the door in her scrubs and did not ask many questions. She had learned, over the years, to read the shape of trouble in the way a woman set down a suitcase. "Come inside, kettle is on." Maya explained only the outline. She had lost the job. She needed a few days to steady herself before she looked for the next one. Lena did not press. She made grilled cheese for Ellie and set a spare pillow on the small couch for Maya. That night, in the dark, Ellie curled against her mother's shoulder and asked in the small voice she used when she was almost asleep, "Mama, when are we going back to see Uncle Adrian and Grandma Rose?" Maya could not answer. She only held the child tighter, and after a long moment Ellie sighed the sigh of a small, satisfied animal and fell asleep with the cloth rabbit tucked under her chin. The next morning, Maya went out to buy food. Lena had left for her hospital shift at 7. Ellie was napping in the back bedroom. Maya asked the elderly neighbor across the fence, a Polish woman named Mrs. Baron, to keep an ear out. It was a 15-minute walk to the corner market. Victor had been watching since the previous evening. He had a man inside the Valenti communication chain who had passed him the outline of Maya's likely location before Adrian's own security had thought to cut the leak. The tap was closed within the hour after Adrian's orders, but the hour had been enough. Victor knew the address. He also knew, thanks to a stray line of conversation Maya had let slip in the estate kitchen 2 days before Serena's letter surfaced, that it had been Ellie herself who had found the envelope under the piano bench. "Mrs. Rose had asked." Maya had answered without thinking. The camera in the pantry ceiling had recorded every word, and Victor, in the ordinary course of his duty as head of security, had reviewed the file. He needed the original letter. He needed every scrap of Serena's evidence in his own 2 hands. Without it, he could not buy his life from the Kozlovs. Empty-handed, he would be shot in the back of a warehouse before the week was out. Ellie was the only hostage in the world for whom Adrian Valenti would trade his own throat. Victor arrived at Lena's small greenhouse at 10:30 in the morning with 2 men in a black van. At 10:28, the neighbor Mrs. Baron received a telephone call from a soft-voiced woman claiming to be the coordinator of the visiting nurse program. A patient 2 doors down was in distress, and no unit was free. Would Mrs. Baron please walk over? Mrs. Baron, who was 71 and still believed in a world where telephones told the truth, hurried out the front gate. Lena's door was unlocked. Melrose Park was that kind of neighborhood, on that kind of morning. Victor walked directly to the back bedroom. Ellie lay curled in the middle of the small bed, one arm around her rabbit, her mouth slightly open the way small children breathe. He lifted her. She stirred. She opened her eyes. She saw the tall, gray-suited man from the estate. Uncle Victor? She was not afraid. Not yet. She knew his face. He worked for Uncle Adrian. He put a finger softly to his lips. "Uncle is taking you to see Uncle Adrian. Be a good girl. Do not cry." Ellie believed him. She let him carry her. She held the rabbit against his shoulder. They were down the front walk and in the black van in less than 40 seconds. Somewhere between the bedroom door and the front step, the rabbit slipped from her grip and fell to the floor of the hallway. Maya came home at 11:15 with a paper bag of eggs and bread. The front door stood open a hand's width. She called out, "Ellie!" No answer. She dropped the bag on the porch and ran into the house. The back bedroom door was open. The bed was empty. Her eyes moved across the floor. The cloth rabbit lay on the threshold, ears splayed, one small button eye catching the light. Maya sank to her knees. For 3 seconds she could not draw breath. Then her hand closed around her phone, and her thumb found the number she knew by heart, because a housekeeper of the Valenti estate had always been required to know it, at any hour of the day or night, without ever having to look. Adrian was in the study with Salvatore, deep in the second stack of paperwork on Victor's shell companies. His phone rang. The screen said Maya. His chest closed. He answered. Her voice broke across 3 words. "Ellie is gone." Adrian was on his feet before the second word finished. The chair went over behind him. His voice, when it came, was level in the terrible way a river is level just before a fall. The address. "Where are you?" Maya read it back to him in pieces, her breath catching between numbers. "Lock the door. Open it for no one. I am 40 minutes away. Rocco is 15. He hung up. He turned to Rocco, who was already on his feet. "Melrose Park. Her cousin's house. Go. Protect her. Salvatore, every loyal man we have. Now. Close every road out of Chicago. Traffic cameras 3-block radius around that address from 10 this morning. Any man who lays a hand on that child, even a scratch, dies by mine. including any of ours who is clumsy. He did not shout. His voice was quiet, but no one in that house had heard him speak in that voice in 3 years. He was in the back of the black sedan within 8 minutes, tearing across midday Chicago behind Enzo at the wheel. In his hand he held the cloth rabbit. Maya had pressed it into his palm the day she left. She had found it on the corridor floor of the estate that morning, and had brought it to him without knowing why. It still smelled faintly of cookies and of a kind of sunlight he had promised himself. Only 3 days before. He would never lose again. He closed his eyes. Wait for me, little one. Traffic cameras across 3 neighborhoods pieced Victor's black van together frame by frame. 6 inside informants confirmed each piece. Within 90 minutes, the route had drawn itself westward across the city, past the old rail yards, over the crumbling iron bridge, into the abandoned industrial district on the far bank of the river, to the warehouse Serena had named in her letter. Adrian arrived with 18 armed men. 4 vehicles took the 4 approaches. A signal jammer was activated on the perimeter. Every phone within a block turned to a black screen. Rocco stepped out of the second car with a rifle case in one hand. Sir, we go in now. Fast. 3 teams. No. Salvatore came around the side of the first car. He carried, of all things, a folder, because Salvatore always carried a folder. Adrian, he has the child. We cannot wait him out. Every minute, no. Adrian was pulling a long black overcoat over his suit. He had left the vest in the car. He was not carrying a weapon. I go in alone, on foot. Rocco, get to the back through the loading dock. Salvatore, hold the front. If shots begin, take his men, not him. I want Victor breathing. He lifted a slim black attaché case from the passenger seat. This is the copy. The originals stay with Salvatore. Rocco was already moving toward the far side of the building, unrolling the plans of an old infrastructure map Salvatore had somehow produced from a city archive on 10 minutes' notice. Adrian walked to the front of the warehouse alone. The main door was rusted open, a hand's width. He pushed it further. It scraped. Inside was a large, empty floor, broken skylight overhead. One shaft of gray afternoon light falling in a slanted column across concrete stained by decades of oil. The smell was engine grease and damp brick, and the faint chemical ghost of something that had long since evaporated. Victor sat on a wooden crate in the center of the light. To his right, on a small folding chair, sat Ellie. Her wrists were bound loosely with a strip of cloth rope. She was not crying. She held against her chest a different rabbit, a soft new pink one Victor had bought from a gas station shelf on the drive out, to keep her quiet. The rabbit Adrian carried in the inside pocket of his own coat. 2 of Victor's men stood at his shoulders, weapons visible. Victor smiled. It was a dry, professional smile, the kind of smile a card player uses when he already knows the last hand of the night. Sir, I have been wondering how many men you would bring. I did not expect you to walk in alone. Adrian set the black case down on the concrete between them. That is the copy. The originals and every financial file sit in Salvatore's safe. I will give you 30 minutes head start on any road you choose, in exchange for Ellie. Untouched. Victor shook his head, slowly. Sir, you underestimate me. I need the originals. All of them. And every file. You will destroy them here, in front of me, one by one. He tilted his head toward the child at his side and let his mouth curl. You do not ask yourself, sir? For 3 years you had no weakness. No woman could touch you. No child meant anything to you. Now you stand here, ready to trade the whole Valenti Empire for a 3-year-old who does not share a drop of your blood. Serena must be laughing in her grave. Adrian was silent a few seconds. Ellie looked up at him from the folding chair. Her eyes were huge and calm. There was no fear in them at all. She whispered, just loud enough for him to hear across the concrete, Uncle Adrian, you came. Adrian did not look at Victor. He looked at the child. When he spoke, his voice was steady and low, but it carried through the whole hollow warehouse. Victor, you are wrong about one thing. Ellie is not my weakness. She is the reason I remember I still have something worth protecting. Serena is not laughing at me. She was the one who taught me that I only took 3 years to understand. At that exact moment, from a steel gantry high above the far end of the warehouse, where Rocco had climbed silently through the loading dock, a single rifle shot cracked the air. The gunman on Victor's left dropped. Everything broke at once. The second gunman raised his weapon. Adrian was already moving. He crossed the 6 feet to the folding chair in 2 long strides, seized Ellie into his arms, and turned his back to the shots his own body between the child and the room. A bullet burned across his left shoulder. He did not stop moving. Rocco fired again from above. The second gunman fell. Victor drew his own pistol and leveled it on Adrian's back. His hand was shaking. Adrian did not draw a weapon. He only tightened his arms around Ellie and turned his head to look at Victor over his shoulder. Shoot. But you will die inside the next breath, and she will live. That is what I need." Victor hesitated half a second too long. The front door of the warehouse crashed open. Salvatore came through it with 3 men behind him, weapons raised. Victor was down on the concrete face first before he understood he had lost. Alive. As Adrian had ordered, Adrian carried Ellie out into the gray afternoon. Blood ran from his shoulder in a slow, steady line down the sleeve of his coat, but his arms did not loosen. Ellie touched the wet fabric with one small finger and looked up at him. "Uncle, you are hurt." Adrian did not slow his step. "I am fine. If you are fine, I am fine." At the perimeter, past the second car, Maya was waiting. Rocco had brought her out to the outer ring the moment Adrian's team had confirmed the address. She stood with both hands pressed against her mouth. Adrian walked to her and lowered the child gently into her arms. Maya crushed Ellie against her chest and lowered her forehead to her daughter's hair and let out one long broken breath. Then she raised her eyes. Adrian took 12 stitches in the shoulder that evening, not at any hospital in the city, but in the small clinic room behind the estate garage, by an old family physician who had been sewing up the Valenti men since before Adrian was born. The press would never write his name. That was the way it had always been done. Ellie stayed on the chair beside him the entire time. Someone had returned to her the true cloth rabbit, the one Adrian had carried in his coat pocket into the warehouse. She held it flat against her chest and watched the doctor's needle with narrowed eyes. She winced each time the thread pulled, in Adrian's place, and did not once cry. Maya stood in the doorway with her arms folded, holding her own elbows. She did not speak. She did not come into the room. She only watched. Over the following week, the whole of Victor Hale's betrayal was pried open in the daylight. $12.4 million of embezzled money was traced through the 3 offshore accounts, the 2 shell companies in Delaware, and 1 holding entity in the Cayman chain. Salvatore led 3 lawyers who worked in shifts without sleep for 4 days. Every dollar was recovered. 3 inside informants across the Valenti operation were identified, dismissed, and quietly escorted out of the state. The Kozlov family lost the eyes and ears they had paid 5 years to grow inside Adrian's ports, and within 9 days they withdrew 2 of their fronts from the southern district. Victor himself was handed over to the family council. By the unwritten law of the world Adrian belonged to, that meant a sentence from which no man walked out a form of a life term more absolute than any court could issue. Victor would not see a free sky again. Adrian did not press Maya to come back. He came to Lena's small greenhouse in Melrose Park once, on a Wednesday morning, alone. He carried a slim leather folder. He did not step inside. Lena watched him from the kitchen window with a coffee cup that had gone cold in her hand. Maya opened the door. He placed the folder on the small wooden table inside the doorway, the formal report. "The necklace matter has been investigated and closed. Your name has been cleared through every internal record. Enclosed is a compensation, which you may accept, refuse, or throw in the river, whichever gives you the most peace." He remained on the threshold, hands quiet at his sides. "I did not come to ask you to return. I came to tell you this. The thing I am most ashamed of in my life is not that Victor stole from me for 5 years. It is the 3 seconds I let my past make me doubt you. Those 3 seconds I will not forgive myself for. You have every right to your own decision. If you never wish to see me again, I will respect that. But Ellie, if you allow it, I would like to be an uncle to that child. With no conditions." Maya did not answer. She did not say yes. She did not say no. Adrian nodded once. He turned. He walked back to the black car. Over the 3 weeks that followed, he had Rocco quietly watch the greenhouse from a discreet distance. No one approached. No one interfered. Ellie caught a light cold in the 2nd week, and Adrian sent medicine and the family pediatrician through Mrs. Rose. And he did not come himself. Inside the estate, he changed the rules. No staff member would ever again have their private space searched without concrete evidence. Any employee under suspicion had the right to review the security footage themselves. Mrs. Rose was to be present as witness in every such case. He wrote, by hand, 22 letters of apology, 1 to each member of the staff who had stood in the corridor that day. Mrs. Rose recounted all of it to Maya on a visit to Lena's house. She did not urge, she did not persuade, she only told, and she poured tea, and she left. Maya listened. The 4th Saturday afternoon came yellow and warm. Maya carried Ellie in her arms to the iron gate of the Valenti estate. She did not press the bell. She only stood. Inside, past the trellis, Mrs. Rose was cutting roses. Ellie spotted her and let out a shriek of delight. "Grandma Rose, Missus." Rose straightened. She stared for 1 whole second. Then she ran. The gate opened. Maya walked through. She did not speak. She only embraced Mrs. Rose once, tightly, and let go. Adrian was standing on the front steps of the main entrance. He did not come down. He waited for her. Maya walked slowly up the drive. Ellie squirmed free and ran ahead and threw her small arms around his knees. "Uncle Adrian, is your shoulder better yet?" He bent and lifted her without taking his eyes from her mother. Maya stopped 3 steps below him. Her voice was low. "I am not coming back as a housekeeper. If I stay, it has to be different." Adrian answered without hesitation. "I know. I have been waiting for you to say that." They walked into the great hall together, 3 shadows crossing the marble at the same pace, no one behind another. For the first time the Valenti estate had ever known, Maya returned, but not as a housekeeper. Adrian offered her a place inside the family's charitable foundation, the small, quiet office Serena had once run, keeping the ledgers and organizing the winter programs for fatherless children across Chicago. It was work that had waited 3 years for a pair of hands honest enough to touch it. Maya began evening classes in accounting. She carried a small notebook everywhere. Mrs. Rose smuggled her extra pens. Ellie was enrolled in a private preschool near the north side. A car was placed at her disposal each morning, but Maya still preferred to walk her daughter through the gate herself, holding the small warm hand until the classroom door closed. Ellie was given a bedroom of her own in the east wing of the 2nd floor directly beside the music room. The door of the music room was never locked again. The relationship between Adrian and Maya grew slowly, the way a plant grows through winter earth. He did not send expensive gifts. He drove her instead to a tiny faux shop in the Vietnamese quarter that Ellie adored, where the plastic chairs wobbled and the broth steamed like a small kitchen sky. He taught her to read a balance sheet. She taught him to sew a button back onto his own shirt, and laughed at him quietly when he pricked his thumb. Mrs. Rose stole photographs of them at the kitchen table without their knowing, and whispered to the head cook, "For 3 years I thought this estate had only ghosts left in it. Now it is breathing again." 6 months later, on a late evening, Adrian returned from a long negotiation over a Newport contract. He stepped into the front hall and lifted his coat from his shoulders. Then he heard it, the piano, rising from the 2nd floor. He stood a few seconds. It was not the standing of a man frozen. It was not pain. It was, this time, only the small quiet of a man arriving home. He climbed the stairs without hurry. Ellie sat on the piano bench. Her feet, at last, brushed the parquet. She was working her way through Serena's melody slower now, more complete, with small childish improvisations of her own woven in between the true notes. Maya stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest, smiling. Adrian passed her. He touched her hand lightly as he went. He sat down beside Ellie. On the closed lid above the music rack, the small, silver-framed photograph of Serena still rested. Beside it now stood a second frame, Adrian, Maya, and Ellie in the rose garden the week before. Ellie perched on his shoulders, Maya laughing into the sun. Neither photograph covered the other. Ellie stopped playing. She looked up. "Uncle Adrian, did you find the last note of the song yet?" Adrian rested one hand on the keys. "Not yet. We will find it together, for the rest of our lives, if we have to. The past does not need to be erased for the present to be lived. Loving someone who is gone does not mean closing the door on those still here. Sometimes the one who unlocks the most hardened heart is not the strongest person in the room, it is the smallest, the most innocent, the one who does not yet see any walls at all, only doors." Dear viewer, if this story touched you, please leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever held on to a keepsake so tightly it began to feel like a prison? What did you find the courage to let go of, so that a new beginning could enter your life? We would love to read your heart in the comments, and to hear how this story met your own. If you enjoyed this journey with Adrian, Maya, and little Ellie, please tap the subscribe button, hit the like, and share this video with someone who may need to hear it today. New emotional stories are uploaded every day, and we would be honored to have you with us for the next one. The story of a mafia boss and a little scavenger girl who saved his entire empire, airing this Saturday. Until then, we wish you good health, peaceful days, and a life full of small warmth. May you always have someone who helps you open the door you locked long ago. Goodbye for now. We will see you in the next video.